Hey, Dawn. I see you're on. So that time my glass showed up. Gotta get it in the right spot there. Got it. There's Dawn.
Looks like Mike joined. We can promote him up to a panelist.
Oh, he came in that way. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to get him. Probably click the other link. That's okay. We'll fix that. That's not a problem. It's the one thing I can actually do. Ah, there it is.
All right.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We hear you, Mike.
Okay, great. Let me see if I'm not showing any video anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. You went to the attendee list instead of the panelists.
Okay, cool. You can see me now?
No, I can't see you. Let's see. There's got to be a way to do that. Let's try this. Stand by.
Mm-hmm.
T-1 to beer opening. I like it.
There it is.
There.
You're coming in, Mike.
Okay. How's that?
I got you now.
All right.
Outstanding. Did
Just
he really
made it
say
in time.
T-1 minute to beer opening? Peter, you waited till 5 o'clock? Really, Peter? It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yes, it is.
Peter's giving the countdown now.
And he's on the atomic clock too, knowing him.
Yeah, and knowing Peter, he probably is on the atomic clock. No doubt about that.
See a synchronization guru or something.
Yeah, we forgot to sync up our watches. My bad.
No, the atomic clock guy. That
Oh.
comment.
Peter is the CEO of Transcend Air.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, he'll be coming up. Hey, Frank, good to see you, buddy.
I worked on atomic clocks early in my career. Rubidium, cesium, hydrogen masers, miniature atomic clock. They got it big enough they could run it off of a couple AA batteries and put it in a backpack so you could use it in the battlefield. Pretty cool stuff.
Interesting.
I should have known that you did that, being the position and time guy, right? Was it position, space, time guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun times.
Control time.
Yep. Yeah, down to the nanosecond. Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
We're just past 5 o'clock here. People are starting to filter in. We've got, give it a minute or two. We got lots of cool people on.
Yeah.
You got the coolest people in the industry are all here right now, you know. Oh boy, Peter just said he could explain how NNTP works to sync your devices to NIST's atomic clocks. You know, Peter, that's a conversation we should have before I need to go to sleep one night.
Then we'll make
Although
you dream.
Jeremy might be interested in that.
Well, then we'll make you dream of IEEE 1588, which is PTP, and
Mm.
all the wonderful time protocols. The little known DTI that synchronizes your broadband connection. So
These little tidbits are what brings us all together here. You learn little things about the people you surround yourself with, and it's kind of interesting.
yeah, how deep they go down the rabbit hole.
Yes. We're not going to go that deep down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. How about people that make beer and wine? They're much more interesting to talk to.
Absolutely. Especially after a few beers and wines.
That's right. I judged wines internationally for 2 years. That's more interesting than timing.
Okay, see, now we're getting someplace. You're becoming more interesting by the minute.
No, if I talk too much more, somebody's going to come in with a cane and pull me out.
Nah, don't worry, nobody's watching this. Nobody outside this little group. It's all good.
We like these little tangents, actually. It keeps things interesting. Why
Yeah,
it's
who
a
wants to,
cocktail
like-
happy hour.
Right, no dry, boring stuff. All right, well, let's start off. I mean, it's 5:02, right? I think it's 5 o'clock somewhere, Peter. There you go. Everybody, welcome to the Ultra Happy Hour. I'm Ray Adams. I'll be your host and bartender for the evening. I'm here with Ron Leach, Vice Chairman and all-around good guy of Ultra. Jeremy Bennington of Spirent Communications and Mike DiCosola of Drone Industry Systems Corporation. I gotta work on, that's like a tongue twister to me for some reason. I'm getting there though, Mike. I'm getting
That's okay. Disc.
Disc,
There you go.
right. So just tell you a little bit, that's what Dawn says, just say disc. A little bit about Ultra for anybody who doesn't know. Ultra is a nonprofit that advocates for the urban air mobility and the UAS industry. We're about 2 years old, based out of New Jersey. Ron and I formed the organization, and we're lucky enough to have 10 outstanding advisors now, some of which are on this call, which I give them a huge shout out for being supporters and helping us guide this ship in the right direction. We aim to bring the operational perspective to the generally academic conversation around these topics. My background, a 31.9-year air traffic controller, just retired a couple months back. Did a bunch of technology stuff for the FAA, did a bunch of stuff up on Capitol Hill. Now I'm doing this. I'm going to throw it over to Ron, give a little intro, Ron, and go from there.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Ray. Always with the kind words. I swear, I think my mom puts you up to some of the talking that you do about me there. So, Ron Leach, co-chair or vice chair of Ultra. I started my career out with the state police and did 23 years there, 15 of which were with the Aviation Bureau. Towards the end, I started working on special projects, which included drones, and basically designed the state police direction that they were going to go when they integrated drone use into division operations. So I kind of got tired of waiting around for the programs to be approved and budgeting and everybody else's interest. I decided to go out and strike out on my own because there was a lack of information from public safety or for public safety for drone use. So how I approach it is, you want to have that extra layer of protection for, for public safety, that any constitutional issues you want to cover, but also more so from a pilot perspective. I want my clients and people I deal with to come at drone use, urban mobility as a pilot perspective and understand what their role and responsibility is. I don't think there's enough of that standardization out there. So that's kind of what I'm doing with my consulting company, Leach Strategic Partners. And of course, with Ultra, we're going to advocate for all positions coming into the urban mobility space. And we like to surround ourselves with smart people and realistically operational people who understand the environment, not just theoretical. We want to bring the whole package to the table.
Well said, my friend, as usual. Next up, Mike DiCosola from DISC, like Tron DISC.
Disc. Yeah. So hello, Mike DiCosola. I've been spending 7 years working on infrastructure in terms of autonomous flight. So my research has been based on the actual IP portfolio that we worked on. One of the portfolios we've been working on was the smart rooftop and ground airport. We created a node-centric system IP that basically takes any kind of hardware. It's agnostic, it's open platform, and it's scalable. And we wanted to bring that into the data platform, so that way there was a zero trust. And that's really where the DoD is going right now, is they want to make sure the data is validated, it's secure, and we want to bring that into a node-centric system where we're open platform, so that way any manufacturer can come on board. And that's been our main focus, and we have several patents in that field that we filed, and I'm happy to be on board right now.
Thanks, Mike. We're happy to have you here. This has been a great relationship we've got going on here, Mike. Thank you again. Jeremy, I'll let you go into your PST, position, space, time stuff. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. So my name's Jeremy Bennington. I run a group at Spirent Communications, which is a company that's been around for almost 100 years under different names. But we've really been the company behind the scenes of GPS and GNSS for decades. We helped design the signals that they use to design the satellites, and then the chipsets and the avionics and stuff that goes in your car and your smartphone for decades. I joined them several years ago to start up a new initiative. You know, being a manned and an unmanned pilot, we're taught to aviate, navigate, and communicate. And that we've gotten pretty good at that in manned aviation. But low altitude flight has a lot of unique challenges when it comes to navigation. And it's why right now most of the regulations say, hey, I got to keep my eyeballs on that thing to make sure it's where it says it is and it's doing what I say it's supposed to do, that we're aviating correctly and we're navigating properly, and mitigate the communications loss. But that limitation today of having to watch the drone isn't going to let most of the industry scale. You know, we won't be able to do search and rescue right. We won't be able to dispatch a drone to an accident scene or surveillance very quickly. We won't be able to deliver packages, medical goods, without being able to fly in these areas without reliable navigation, and especially for beyond visual line of sight. And so, having been both a pilot and an expert in GPS, we said, gosh, there's lots of issues here. How do we solve this so that the pilot or the operations center can know ahead of time, I can rely on GPS, I can rely on GNSS, or I can use other systems to reliably navigate. So that's what I'm doing here at Spirent. I also sit as a co-chair on the ASTM standards for beyond visual line of sight navigation. We're writing the requirements to do it, and in large part trying to use existing regulations and existing commercial off-the-shelf solutions so we can fly the aircraft we have today and use existing rules with the FAA rather than having to recreate the wheel. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but really just trying to get this industry going where they're supposed to go when it comes to navigation, and do it reliably so we can see the benefits in our society.
Very cool. Definitely need to know where you're going, right? That's exceptionally important, especially now that we're talking about operating around some urban environments where you're going to have obstructions that are going to mask out satellite signals. And if anybody's ever been down on Wall Street, down by Wall Street, New York City, down the Canyon of Heroes, and tried to pull out your Apple Maps or your Google Maps and try to figure out where you are and where you want to go, it has no idea. It can't get a signal. So it's really, really important for anybody who wants to operate in an urban environment that your drone's going to know where it is and where it's going to go, right? So, and Jeremy's company is specifically doing that. And I think Mike's got some technology that'll probably help us work that out also. But just a couple of things before we start. So the premise of the Ultra Happy Hour, first off, it's based around a couple of people sitting around having a drink, talking about like what they do, right? So I'd like to just kind of break out, say what I'm drinking. I've got my Michter's bourbon out today. Not that Michter's sponsors us in any way, shape, or form. I can't even get it to show up there. There it is. If they'd like to, give me a call. But the fact is, it's a good bourbon. So I'd like to, let's see, Ron, what are you drinking? What do you got going on?
Let's see. Today I got a little Angel's Envy. It's in my aviator's glass with one ice cube. Can't really see it too well, and that's my spirit of the evening.
All right, Mike.
He's Serrano on the rocks.
Well done. Well done. Jeremy, what you got?
I am drinking out of a Mooney cup, but it's tea because I have to coach tonight my kids' team. So maybe afterwards.
Okay, tea, gotcha.
So we got some people weighing in too out there in the field here. Good choice, someone said to me. Oh, Elizabeth there. Okay, thank you. And then Frank is
double Tito's.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Nice. Everybody's see, we like to bring the party. That's what we do.
Thank you. Yeah.
Catch up with us at one of these conferences. We like to bring the party, because you know what? If you can't work with your friends over a couple of drinks, then work kind of sucks. But So I'd like to actually just kind of mention our sponsors real quick, because Ultra is a sponsorship-based organization. That's how we pay the bills. We are currently, one of our sponsors, our leadership sponsors, is the HHI Hilo Holdings heliport, which is just outside of New York City. It's the biggest rotorcraft FBO, probably on the East Coast, if not in the country. Anybody who's going to operate in the urban air mobility space should know them, because you're going to want to be close to New York City. Additionally, my good friend Ron Leach of Leach Strategic Partners is also a leadership sponsor. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Leach Strategic Partners. And then Low Altitude Operational Solutions is another one of our leadership partners and sponsors. So thank you to them. Let's raise a glass. Let's start this thing off. Here's to friends, good times, and good conversation.
Absolutely.
Just made that up. All right, so tonight's topic, supporting UAS operations in urban environments. Who out there thinks it's going to be easy to fly your drones around cities? Just raise your hand. Do you know where to raise your hand?
I'll tell you, I have a question.
I'll raise your hand. That's not true.
The wrong one?
What's up?
I got a question for Jeremy. He mentioned something that caught my interest there. What do you see this chip shortage doing to what you're bringing to the table as far as UAS industry is going to affect any of the navigational stuff you're working on?
Boy, that's great. Off the
Wow.
wall question. Start with. I do think that chip shortages. If I was a chip manufacturer, you go for the high value stuff, right? So we've already seen the automotive supply chains disrupted because a lot of the ICs and those systems are really cheap. Probably a little bit less so in drones and computers and higher value equipment. But I think it does reinforce that we need to use the aircraft we've already paid and have in hand to the extent possible to start flying these missions. And then we can add more capabilities as they become available, either because they're still in development or there's shortages of supplies. So I think it just reinforces what I'm sure most businesses and public safety folks have, can I use what I got first? Especially if there's supply demand issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even thinking about that, honestly, Ron. That's a good question. I'm just looking at this as, kind of going forward, right? Everybody wants to do drone delivery. They may not start in Manhattan. They may want to start in Dallas or I don't know, Los Angeles or something, or they want to fly urban air mobility. They want to fly into the urban canyons, right? But I'm not sure really if that whole ecosystem down in those canyons is really set up for that type of flight, right? So we've got all kinds of issues with, weather and wind and loss of GPS signal and, VHF radio blockage. The signals get blocked because they're line of sight and all kinds of good stuff like that. So it sounds to me like you two guys, Jeremy and Mike, have like technologies that will help enable those types of, or at least get around some of those limitations. So I kind of wanted to focus the conversation on that. I know specifically navigation, right, Jeremy? You and I talked at, I think it was AUVSI that we met.
Yeah.
I did some work in the navigation space for the FAA with the ground-based augmentation system, which is LOS basically, and we did the Cat 3 system design approval. So I'm well aware of how hard it is to keep the integrity of GPS signals when you've got lots of interference in the environment. So, maybe we could talk a little bit about even if you're not directly in an urban environment, but just like the limitations that you find working around obstructions and stuff like that, and how your systems or your service can help enable the planning and the actual operation of those vehicles.
Yeah, the challenge with GPS is that, it was really designed for aircraft that are well off the ground or in the approach or departure phase. And by design, as you know from the FAA, right, aircraft to a large extent, all of those approach corridors are designed to be out of the way of obstructions so we don't run into things when we're on instrument flight. So, we rely on GPS as a way to navigate and we assume that the GPS has a clear view of the sky. Now, and there's some rotorcraft and stuff that out there that do get into obscurations, but again, you're not that close to a building generally, or you're on top of it or above it. But with these smaller aircraft, with these drones and air taxis, they're going to be in it. And the challenge is, a picture probably speaks a thousand words here. So I won't bore everybody with a bunch of slides, but just look at some pictures on these. Oh, I have to be able to, I'll be allowed to share. So
I
Ray,
can set you up with that. Just
give me
give
the
me
con
1
here.
second here.
So while that's coming along, the GPS satellites orbit the Earth at 1 degree per minute. They're not stationary. So they're coming over and then they set and they come around and they go around. There's a bunch of them, right? And so the challenge is if you're in an urban environment, they're coming in and out of view, and they're coming in and out of view as they go across in and out of the building shadows. And so if you think about it, you're a drone, you know, down here, you got these satellite signals that are coming in and out of view. So how do you know when you're going to have good GPS coverage in order to fly at these low altitudes? And so, you know, again, in like the military or an aviation construct, I got to have some situational awareness here. I can't just, you know, assume that GPS is going to work. I can't just assume that the RAIN, which is what we use in existing systems that checks satellite health, is going to tell me that I'm okay. And things like UAS and GBAS and RTK, all these technologies that make GPS better and more accurate, they all still assume that you have a bunch of satellites available, that you've got 8, 10, 12 satellites that are visible to get that centimeter accuracy that some people want. And so now you're just left with this issue of, you know, I've got GPS or GNSS, which is GPS plus Galileo from Europe, GLONASS from the Russian Federation, and Baidu from China, and whether you want to use all those or not, it's kind of more of a political discussion. But you got those satellite signals, you got ways to improve those satellite signals to mitigate the delays from the atmosphere, but you have a reliability problem. So if I'm going to go operate those in what we call an urban canyon or an urban area, I have a reliability issue. I don't know whether that system's going to work very well. And aviation's not unique in that. You got the same problem with smartphones. Like you said, your smartphone down on Wall Street has a really hard time getting a fix. Your car has a hard time getting a fix. So all of these industries have the same problem of how do I get better reliability in these urban, suburban areas? How do I mitigate that? You know, if I have an intermittent loss because maybe it got jammed for a second, or maybe it really got into an area where there really is no coverage. But you got to have that situational awareness to know where and when that's going to happen. And that's the technology that we've been working on for the past several years that, you know, skip forward, gives you a heat map. Where can I safely fly and where can't I safely fly? And there's really two ways to go about it. In a rural area, and this happens to be the Outer Banks in North Carolina, where everybody would assume it's all great. It's not. As you get near buildings, and depending on how the building's oriented on the earth and the shadow and how close it is to other buildings and the roof line, it changes. So what you got to have is a very basic analysis that says, where is it safe to fly? Now in this, if I'm going to fly with existing regulations, so I'm going to meet all of the ADSB, remote ID requirements, and even have the performance of a localizer approach, LPV, you know, that gives me 26-foot accuracy, which is probably good enough to make sure that I'm compliant to the airspace. My Atlantic approval said I could operate here. I want to operate here, or I'm going to go dispatch this drone, you know, to go do surveillance in downtown New York. You know, 26-foot accuracy is probably good enough from a GPS perspective, and then I'll make sure I use the infrared radar stuff to make sure I don't run into the buildings, right? So this says in those green and yellow areas, I'm safe to fly. And I just always stay in those areas in a rural environment. But it gets more complex when you get into downtown. So this happens to be my hometown here in Indianapolis, which it's the Midwest, it's boring. We do have a couple large buildings here, not quite like New York, but we do have some, you know, 80-story buildings. And what you see is, you know, these areas of GPS or GNSS degradation do exist in these urban canyons. Now, what's interesting is that they change over time. And so what you really want to be able to do is have a tool, much like a weather forecast, that says, hey, if I got to dispatch a surveillance drone to go surveil that crowd or go to that fire and figure out where, where's this, where do I need to dispatch the first responders to get to the right spot in the fire, especially if you've got a suburban or urban area where I got to choose which street I want to put those trucks down. Or if I've got a drone that's going to go fly and deliver medical goods, what's the safest way to traverse that environment at that time? Because these shadows change all the time. They're constantly changing. So you got to have a tool that can tell you, like, within seconds, here's the safe path through that environment. And I can tell you, to your earlier point, Ray, can it be easy? Yes. This data, this solution can get integrated into flight planning tools. We talk about UTM. UTM is going to take a while to materialize, but a flight planning tool, whether it be part of a UTM system or on your tablet or PC, that just says, just like a weather forecast, and I got to stay within a 15-knot maximum. I want to fly to the existing FAA standards. Where are the green and yellow areas? Select my flight path and go, because I don't want to have to train my operational crew, my pilots, about all this GNSS geekery, but just say, hey, if we're going to follow the FAA guidelines, I got to stay in green and yellow. Here are the places that are either always okay to go, or for my flight right now in this urban area, these are safe places to go. Go fly. Go make that happen. And that's where we're at. We're at that stage now where integration's happening with flight planning providers to do that. Now, I'll say one last thing, and I'll give it back to the team here. The ultimate goal here is to not only use that for flight planning, but actually embed it in the hardware on the drone. And if we do that, which we're starting to do in automotive, is to actually make the receiver perform better. Because if the receiver now has situational awareness to know which satellites are real and line of sight, meaning that it can clearly see them, it can start rejecting false signals and reflections. It can start getting rid of the reflections you have off of buildings. It can get rid of spoofing signals, because it knows that, hey, if I'm receiving a signal from this side and I'm on this side, it can't, that can't be real. So there's some of that technology that'll take several years to materialize, where we see a performance increase. But we could go take existing drones, the existing GPS and GNSS systems, put that into the system and find safe places to fly in the urban area. No problem.
So good stuff. I'm sure the FAA is happy to hear the progress that you're making with that.
I think there's some of the FAA that are starting to hear it. We're just now getting the word out. So, and that's part of these kind of discussions, make people aware. People have not been able to visualize this kind of stuff before, but there wasn't a need, right? If I go out in my, commercial aircraft, Part 121, Part 120, all that stuff, they don't care. GPS from the gate to the runway is fine, and I'm in the air, so it wasn't a problem. But now it is. Now there's a solution. And so, there's a question here in the chat from Peter, right? Can it be embedded in before you fly? Absolutely. We're a data.
Honestly, I think that. Let me just take a look at the participant list here. I think we might have an answer to that. Hold on. I thought I saw John Hagrains on earlier, but I guess he's not here. I think he runs before you fly the app. So he said he was going to be on, but that's a great question, right? I mean, I would assume personally, I told you when I met you, Jeremy, this is really interesting to me because I know the challenges of GPS, dealing with it from an FAA perspective. Yeah, it sounds like it's one of those things that anybody and everybody who wants to actually do the right thing and know that their drone's not going to go fly away someplace should know what it looks like over the time period they're going to fly.
Yeah, I would encourage the tool providers that we're using, like Before You Fly, which FAA helps supplement, that they start integrating this data. Come to us, start integrating that data, figure out how we're going to commercialize it, so that is it a public service? Is it something that subsidized? How does that happen? But it becomes really critical, just like I get my weather off of ADS-B, TIS-B feeds, right? It is fundamental to flight. Aviate, navigate, communicate. I got to have the tools to tell me that I can navigate. And so getting that integrated is really essential. And we can even start with simple stuff like, you mentioned one of your sponsors being one of the largest teleports in Manhattan. Where am I going to put all these other vertiports? right? How do I know that that's a safe place to put it, aside from I want to stay, far enough away that I don't run into people, but how do I know that I got good GNSS there? Right?
Yeah, no, it's a
Yeah.
good point. Right now, a lot of it's VFR. There's not a whole lot of instrument approaches into those city type of heliports and stuff because of the TERPS issues that FAA runs up against, navigational issues and protecting planes and stuff. Maybe down the road with an enhanced network, sort of maybe along the lines of a GBAS or something where you're getting enhanced signals from the ground, where you get good planning from your systems, you could get down a little closer into the heliports. I mean, this is all stuff we should be talking about to drive IFR access to almost to the ground for all these type of vertiports, right?
Yeah, you mentioned VFR, really, and we certainly don't want to restrict the thought of having GPS predictions and integrity to IFR and beyond visual line of flights. Flights. How many of the flyaways that people have had over the last 10 years, where it's all been VFR, all visual line of sight flights, are probably attributed to some sort of GPS denial or interference, probably because of the buildings and terrain they were around. The challenge is, of course, that's really hard to diagnose, and certainly most people aren't reporting those. But certainly a lot of the things that we've seen, even news reports of like a guy in Las Vegas who lost GPS, things started to drift, then he lost comms because now he's out of range, and the thing floated, and then the battery finally died and landed on a taxiway at McLaren. Bad situation, right? Had he known, that he was going to have poor GNSS, he could have stayed away from those environments. So
Yeah, speaking of the comm stuff too, Jeremy, that's a big deal because comms are generally VHF and they're direct line of sight, right? It's just like GPS signals are.
Yeah.
And I know that Mike, I don't know how Mike's technology works. I am not that smart, but Mike does. And I know Mike he's told me about this whole node centric network capability he's working on that has integrity, data integrity built into it, which I'm thinking about this in the urban environment. If you've got nodes, many nodes around that can relay information back and forth to each other, you can alleviate those line of sight issues because the network is going to solve that. It's going to work its way around the line of sight issues. Mike, how do you see that playing out? If you had to deploy a node-centric network in a city, like say your rooftop vertiporta box systems, right? And then all the drones that come out of them, how does that work? And how do you see that kind of all fitting into enabling an urban environment for UAS?
Well, a couple things. To us, everything is a node, right? So we want to make sure everything's socializing with each other. So using an example, you can, whether you have MIMO technology sitting on the roof, you have 5G, it doesn't matter what next gen comes out in terms of a sensor or, whatever type of data is going to be necessary for that mesh network. Our goal is to be able to have them all crowdsourcing where they're communicating as a social communication. So for an example, if a drone was sitting on top of a parapet roof and it was sitting right behind it and somebody did a hail on it, and that hail said, hey, you're the right drone, you're the right payload, you're the right equipment, I need you. And now all of a sudden it's looking at the IMC swath in our weather data exchange that we're working on. And by the way, that's with Don Birchoff with True Weather Solutions. We joint ventured with them. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, well, you know what, here is a weather swath. And right now we need to kind of predetermine here, do we want to ground this drone or do we want it to take off? Well, the whole idea is to avoid as much grounding as possible. So with those sensors on a node centric system, if you're sitting there from AGL to 400 feet, you can start taking those data gaps, those gaps that are going to be basically data desert, and you can start having them communicate. So you can look at a map and you will be able to say, look, this map is the icon on our legend. We're making a legend right now for different kinds of products. So let's say we wanted to pull up the landing pads or the charging stations. We might be able to pull that up on the map and say, okay, this has an IMC and it's not conducive for flight, but the landing pad on waypoint A at that rooftop on that strip mall can still take off. We don't need to ground it. We just have to avoid IMC because we're looking at this geo location and there's a landing pad closest to that swath but outside of it. Now we have beyond visual line of sight, we got situational awareness, we got detect and avoid, because we're using all the sensors to communicate. And that's where that mesh network comes into play.
I can't help think, between what Jeremy's system has going on and what you have there, Mike, how that can't be integrated. So now you have weather, and you mentioned data deserts, right? So that fits right into what Jeremy's talking about. No
Yep.
reliability of signal sources for navigation. I mean, this seems like it's an easy fit, and it makes sense the way you gentlemen are explaining everything.
Yeah, I agree. And this stuff's not new and it doesn't change, right? You got to fly the aircraft, you got to be able to navigate, you got to be able to communicate. And it's just the means of it are changing depending on the flight environment. And so what you're talking about, mesh networks and being able to authenticate it and track it are essential. It's not VHF with 2.5 megahertz spacing anymore.
And what you can do from that point on is, if you take, because you have a mesh network, you want to integrate it with blockchain, because they're doing the zero trust, and we've got NIST, we've got all these rules that are going to be for cybersecurity. So we need to make sure that if we're making it better, right? If we're making the system better, and we're making it be able to communicate at where all these desert areas are, if we're trying to fill those gaps, then we want to make sure that this product is also verified. So, that's where blockchain comes in. We want those blocks of data to be verified. And then once those blocks of data are verified, we can then log them and encrypt them and use them later for any kind of AI/ML that we want to do, so whatever kind of learning, or if what we call chain of custody. So let's say we do have a spoof, using your example, Jeremy, we have some kind of spoof that came out there. If the data was invalidated, now it can go into a vault for forensic examination later. So from that point, you can actually take the chain of custody of that blockchain data and figure out where its source came from. And so that data isn't lost. It's merely sitting there, not being populated into the good data. And then once that data is actually validated, that's where we go to somebody like, for instance, True Weather Solutions. They'll be able to take that data and calibrate it, and then turn around and use the use case, the mission, the whatever operation it is, and then make special use for it in terms of its SaaS program. So that's where he would say, okay, well, we're gonna value this data now, because this data has certain integrity that is conducive for flight in this type of operation. And that's where we go into the weather data exchange, because now we're going to be offering value add that allows people to want to participate. One of the biggest problems here is nobody wants to buy the sensors. And how do we get the buy-in? How do we get people to say, look, we need to start bringing the price down to these sensors by having people start subsidizing, whether it's government or private sector. How do we get the subsidization involved where we can actually turn this into a monetary ecosystem? And the way to do that is to turn around and start offering this data validation and getting it on a discoverable exchange, an exchange that others can actually choose what it is they want from what source it is. So using that example of what we said, the mapping system would be able to be opened up. And let's say you said, well, I want these particular, and we'll use what's out there right now. Let's say we want ASOS, well, the ASOS is at this lat lawn area, and there's 4 in this region. Okay, well, I'd like to have that data purchased, because right now discoverable data in weather, and whether it's a standby or a remote sensor, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of times it's hard to get all this data together. And so having one exchange that's discoverable, that you can actually start having value add as somebody who's creating APIs, SDKs, firmware, somebody wants to integrate into their system, this is where that open platform comes in. And that's why it's agnostic. And the blockchain allows us to really track everything to make sure it's all done right.
So Peter Schmidt, I got him up here. He's that striking guy up on the jet there in the picture. He had a question, and it's, let me just quickly take a look. Please discuss local deconfliction versus centralized mega databases in the cloud. That's for you guys, because I have no idea what that means. Peter, can you hear me? You there, Peter?
Yep, I'm here.
All right.
There we go.
So
Thanks.
why don't you join in this conversation? Would you like to be on camera or not?
Sure, actually, I dressed for the occasion, so.
You actually, oh, good. That's good. I like that. Hold on, stand by. Let me work that out for you, because anytime we can get one of our fantastic advisors up here, we will absolutely do that. It's just, once I figure out how to do that, I will.
We dress for the occasion too. We aim to
Ah,
please.
yes, very nice. All right, Ron wins.
like this.
I don't know how to turn my camera on. It's not giving me the.
Hold on,
control.
I'll give you a sec. I gotta, this is where like I need like a producer.
Yeah.
I'm not cool like that.
We got Zoldi out there. Maybe she can help.
There you go. Now you should be up there.
Here we go.
Oh, you did dress for the occasion.
Sharp.
I clean up while we're pitching investors today. So guys, my question for you is really, you've now got this localized information about GPS availability and weather that's helping you to make decisions about safety of flight. But so now I'm talking about deconfliction, both drone to drone and drone to manned aircraft, crewed aircraft. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts, since you guys have been thinking deeply about this. What are your thoughts about sort of local approaches versus, I've heard people like as part of UTM proposing that everybody talks to the Procrustean database in the cloud, and then it tells everybody where to go. So what are your thoughts on that? That was my question.
Jeremy, you want to answer that, or I can answer it up to you?
Yeah, I can take a first shot at it. So, for the data we're generating with regards to GPS and GNSS coverage, we don't need sensors on the ground. It's all cloud generated based upon a bunch of other data. Ultimately, it'd be great to get some data back from the drone to kind of help kind of crowdsource some of the data. The problem with GPS right now is that because the GPS receivers don't have situational awareness of the signals, they're stochastic, meaning the data you get is all over the place, and even machine learning has a problem with it. So best thing is to actually give it SA first through the services we have. But what that really gets to as well is, if you think about it, like when you go to a wireless carrier like Verizon or AT&T, they have a coverage map. They say, hey, we've got 3G, 4G, 5G, you can expect these kind of bandwidths here and here. Is to be able to provide that for GNSS and say, hey, if you operate here, you're going to have this level of performance. Over here, you're going to have a different level of performance. And over here, you're going to have a different level of performance. Now, based on your equipage, that may mean that you got 100 feet of accuracy or 50 feet or 1 foot. It depends on your equipage and whether or not you've got a bunch of different types of that technology. Now, what that does from a network perspective, you can get that back over the network like Mike's talking about. Now I can do really interesting strategic deconfliction, right? Because now I know, okay, well, if you've got ADSB and you're certified to TSO C199, the FAA has, okay, now I know your level of performance with specific kind of GPS coverage. Now I know, hey, that ADSB return that I'm getting from that aircraft, or broadcast, not a return, it's not a radar, but that broadcast I'm getting from that ADSB, from that participating equipment, is going to have this level of accuracy. Now that means that my near midair collision radius and my alert radius can be so big. And same thing for remote identification if we do it right. Not just the rule of remote identification, but how people certify it, or means of compliance in the new language, right? So how do we put that stuff together so that we can not only strategically deconflict from a planning perspective, but also in operation, be able to say, okay, I know the environment, I know how these systems are designed and built, I know their equipage. Now I can get really smart about how I'm going to optimize the use of the airspace, knowing that there's going to be different types of aircraft that are operating. So that's kind of where my mind's at with the issue. So be interested to hear what everybody else is thinking.
So I guess I'm the way I have it in my head is you have a bunch of nodes, right? This is where we keep talking about the nodes. So to me, it could be a VTOL, eVTOL. It doesn't matter if it's a drone, if it's used in different types of engines. None of that matters to us, because what does matter to us is that, do you have edge-to-edge computing? Is there something that is on board that, some type of payload sensor that can be able to communicate both through the edge computing on the actual system itself, but also as a hybrid with the actual cloud-based system. So this is where you're using a hybrid system where certain data is going to be taken care of right on board, and then the rest of that data is going to be on that node-centric network system that's cloud-based. But this is where that source communication that Jeremy was bringing up, that's where that really plays in, because what you're able to do now is the more buy-in that you have, the more nodes that are participating, the more information you have. And it doesn't have to be something that is dynamic. It could be static, in terms of hardware. So if it's sitting there like a landing pad or a charging station or a drone port, or you might, and then you have a dynamic drone going en route. We have something called what we call it daisy chaining. So an example of that is you have the data from the departure drone sitting there saying, okay, well, this is how the weather looks here. Our ambient temperature is this or whatnot. And then you have the en route drone going, hey guys, I'm in the middle of this right now, and I got eyes in the sky. And, there's no human factor in this, and there's no CRM, and, situational awareness is me. And this is what I see. I'm about to go into, I see lightning with my lightning sensor. I can tell my ceiling, my ceiling of my clouds. And by the way, we're about to go into IMC. I'm going to let the guy know at the other end over there, that landing pad at my arrival, you know what? You're in that spot too. So let's all tell the other guy, do not sit there grounded, just go around. And that's the daisy chain of that data, because we're getting real-time situational awareness on a node-centric system, but they're sitting there on with those nodes on board. So there's certain data that's going to be communicated on board, and then that's also being crowd dispersed.
That's very cool. And there's other people in the chat, so I don't want to dominate this, but I just want to connect what you just said to what Jeremy said. Jeremy painted a picture of the node, making an estimate of how good the information the other nodes can have is. So if I think you don't know what you're talking about, then I'm going to be much more leery about getting close to you. And where that ties to the weather is, if I know you're an IMC, then I'm going to give you a wider berth, because I know your detect and avoid sensors are degraded, for example.
Yep.
Is that fair?
It is, and that's part of blockchain, by the way, because blockchain does it has a buy-in. It turns around and says, look, you know what, we need, in order to validate this data, let's take 4 nodes that are within this area for this type of data, and let's compare notes and see if that data is validated. And so you can actually take comparable data within that central area, and you can do that. You can do that theory that you just brought up, where you can say, is this real data, or is this something I can rely on, or should I avoid that? And that's really where you're going with that, because you're having all this node-centric information communicating at a geolocation. Yeah. So whatever's participating is going to say, yeah, I confirm, that's what I have, and that's how that works.
And use term geolocation. How does it have the integrity to actually know that it is where it says that it is, and for the system on the back end of it, for the cloud portion to go, I believe you based upon where you are, and it's a bit of a crawl, walk, run, leap kind of mentality of, look, there's existing aircraft out there. Some are controlled via a bunch of different means from their control stations or over LT and what have you. Let's start by at least saying, hey, if we're going to operate in an urban area, let's make sure that we understand what the environment is, right? That we get a prediction of what the GPS signals are going to be, so I know what integrity I have for that flight. And maybe we start, okay, we only allow 1 unmanned aircraft in that area, right? We're, just an authorization that says, okay, yeah, go fly there, you own it. Start to get the data back, get it back and get it authenticated. And then we can start moving down that path of, okay, now we can start saying, well, now I can allow more aircraft, or I can make that volume smaller based upon it. Because, the ultimately of being able to see, lots of drones flying around these areas, doing surveillance and package delivery and all this kind of stuff. Today, let's just get one. Let's get one. Let's get a couple out there, and probably start with the really high value stuff. Let's make sure that we can go assure public safety. Let's make sure we can deliver medical goods. then we'll keep working down that path. And those are the ones that can help share their data, especially if they're coming from public safety. That data, to some extent, there's of course different permissions. In some cases, something has to be shared. In some cases, it has to be autonomized. But and start getting that data, getting those flights moving, get it into the systems that Mike describes would be a great step forward.
I want to add to what you said there, Jeremy, because you, at the end there, you went right to what my thought process was about a scalable capacity system. So we do this on a macro scale across the national airspace system now, based upon conditions in different regions of the country. And then of course, how capacity flows through different sectors. And at some point, if a sector is going to get overloaded, we either slow it down or we redirect some aircraft. What you're doing is you're bringing this to the micro, or not micro, but let's call it the regional level or sub-regional level, where you'll be able to make these decisions not based on predictions only, but also on real-time data. And it won't have the same latency effect that it does in the national airspace system right now, because the distances travel will be shorter. Right now, it's hard if you're managing a 3,000-mile route to tell an aircraft that's going to take 5 hours to get someplace that he can't leave yet, because in 5 hours it might be bad. But if you're doing 5-minute flights, 10-minute flights, you can scale this airspace capacity and manage the routes around it on almost a real-time basis. And I think what you guys are enabling that, or I see that in a UTM system, that you two guys, Mike and Jeremy, your technologies along with Don's are going to enable that, ultimately a UTM traffic management system. I call it traffic management as a traffic flow management system that's going to be able to manage takeoffs and landings and capacity in the airspace based upon exactly what you guys just said. And I think we just made a breakthrough. We should get some IP patents on that right now, because that's like good stuff.
Yeah,
Peter, you're in, Ron, you're in. That's cool. Anybody else on the call? Maybe you're in too. Okay, but
yeah,
I really think that was good stuff.
The cool things about some of that data, like weather, like what Don's working on with Mike, is that the drone can be a sensor. It is a source of new authenticated information, because for the most part, the information that it's sensing about winds and you know all the other weather information is likely to be pretty accurate, and so you can trust its incorporation into the network. Some of the data, though, does need a lot more, you know, scrubbing and authentication to make sure that it works, beyond just crowdsourcing it and finding the, you know, the machine learning trends of it. But you know, that all gets into how do we bring this data in? How do we authenticate it? What are the sources of trust? And then, you know, to some extent, what communications do we actually need all the time? And so there's a playoff between in C2C, right? Part of the reason why I need a constant communications, because I can't trust that the damn thing can fly and navigate properly. But if I can fly and navigate properly, maybe I can withstand a little bit of loss of comms every once in a while. So there's this balance here of these systems that's really going to be critical going forward. And we only have like 10 minutes or
Yeah, I know. Time flies when you're having fun, right? Or at least talking
the
about
next
stuff that
topic.
only a few people understand. But
Fallon had
So-
something here, was asking about the subsidizing some of these sensors here. I think maybe that'd be a good segue into that topic right there.
we have about 5 questions from Pressure Caraway, who I know Brent was out there and he asked a question that was about the subsidization, right? I think he said that, or he made a comment about that, which I think that's what's kind of in the plans. The monetization of the data on the exchange, right? Mike, that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, that it is. You know, there's a couple different exchanges, but using the weather data exchange as an example, you know, one of the questions I just read that you were addressing was, you know, how does that get affected in terms of the end user? Like, how does the end user actually get a buy-in on this? You know, if there's already a subsidized cost and somebody's already taken the benefit of it, how can I, as a UTM operator or somebody who's offering some kind of SaaS software, how do I offer that same offering and still make a profit? And really, that's just the programs that you're offering, because a lot of times this is going to be ConOps related. You know, it's going to be driven by ConOps. So whatever your operation is, and your end user, your true end user, so your UTM and then your true end user, these are just nothing more than the APIs that you currently do. So, you know, if you turn around and say, look, I see that you want to get into the VTOLs. VTOLs are now API integrated, and we're going to go ahead and start offering the VTOLs because the FAA has allowed it. And now you, as a customer of ours, can now integrate that API into your system and offer that as a value add package. So what you're really doing is opening up different opportunities. And one of the things that would, if we were to get into the weather data exchange, is we have data integrity, right? What is the actual integrity of the data? And so one of the other questions was spoofing. Well, how do we know that the integrity of the data is good? Well, this is why this is a node-centric system, because several nodes that understand the characteristics that are necessary to qualify and match between nodes. It's where you're almost getting like votes between nodes where they're saying, yeah, I see the same thing you see. Yeah, and that meets our criteria. You know what? That doesn't. Something's wrong here. And that's how you can actually sit there and do the validation portion. How do you monetize that as the end user? You're simply saying, look, we got blockchain validated data that is in our node-centric system, and based on your ConOps, these are the recommended vertiport. This is what we call vertiport in a box solution, because the strategic partners we're going to be able to say, look, our customers want an a la carte choice. This is our preferred drone. This is our preferred landing pad, our preferred charging station. These are our preferreds, and these are the people we already have contracts with. We want to be able to offer these a la carte choices on your open platform and still be able to make the end user profit based on their ConOps. So we want to be able to say, look, for the ConOps you're using, you need to use these vendors of ours. And these vendors of ours will give you the APIs for, and that'll meet your use case or your mission statement. But hopefully that answered some of the questions there.
And part of the first layer of defense there, before you even compare nodes, is that the system you're collecting the data from should have its own integrity check, right? To say, wait a minute, this is different than I expected, right? So if you have some situational awareness where you're saying, look, I expected to have these 8 satellites available, and now I've got 10. Where do those extra 2 come from? Where I got 2? What the hell's going on here? It with some integrity on board, just like weather, right? Hey, I was told that it was going to be VFR clearing a million, and I can only see 4 feet in front of me. What's going on here? So you can start to make sure that those node checks have some, again, situational awareness to filter out the long tail of the curve and find out people that are really off the reservation because they're being spoofed or they have equipment failure or whatever, and then keep the data pristine is an important function.
Look, I just have to comment that Precious Comments have laid out a roadmap of like all the critical issues that have to be solved to make this work. So Ray, I really think you should promote her and let her get her words in.
I asked her, Fresh, if it's okay, I'm going to promote you up too. We're going to have the whole team up here. Everybody's going to be here. Here you come. Brett's on. Hey, Brett, what's going on? Fresh, you there?
Russia, you're muted.
There you go. Still can't hear you.
Better?
Yep.
Okay. Last day at a conference, but you caught. Okay, so I was curious about some of the things you were touching on because I deal with last mile autonomous vehicles, connected cars. So I'm in with 5G AA, and some of the sensors you're talking about that you're building, we're having to do also rip and replace with RSUs, roadside units. And I was kind of curious because when you dive into smart cities and they want to have all of these sensors, if you could actually get more bang for your buck, all of the things you're asking for, it would be nice to put this also in the roadside sensors, specifically in the urban settings, because then you could actually get the data that you need and not have to cost justify it, rebuilding an entire system that we're also going to have to do for autonomous vehicles.
Absolutely. And I want to pronounce your name right, Priscia, right?
Oh, rhymes with Alicia. It's Priscia.
Priscia, thank you. I don't. My name looks like Michelle, but so I get a lot of hits on that one. So the answer to your question is remember I said those were one of the data exchanges. One of them is called Advanced Mobility Data Exchange. Okay, and again, the whole purpose of this is to have discoverable data, right? And so we want the buy-in. We want everybody who has those sensors available, whether it's on a vehicle, on a phone, if it's sitting on a stop sign, it's a windmill. We want all that data to be able to be discoverable to whomever is wanting it. And so the problem we have right now is, where is all this data, right? It's here, it's there. Who do we have to, where do we find it? And how do we know it's good data? And how do we know it hasn't been already spoofed and it has a Trojan with it? And now you just inherited that Trojan. So what is the onboarding process of that firmware? So part of what we're doing is we're going to be doing a cybersecurity full stack. So that way we can onboard you. If you have your own SDKs, your own APIs, we can make sure that onboarding process is done right. So that way, when it comes into the system, it's not coming in with Trojans, right? And you want to make sure that same concept on your end of the fence, of course, is the same concept where you're protecting your interests. But this is where the blockchain comes in again, because where does this information come from? We can give you all the data in the world. Everybody can keep chipping in on all these sensors, right? But if these sensors are not being able to find the source, where did it originate from? What's the chain of custody of this data? Who knows? So from that, there was a spoofing question, and that's where that, hey, I don't know where that came from. It looked like the same, let's even talk remote ID, right? So you can have remote IDs for sensors at that point, because it's all IP at that point, right? They're all just identifying their own systems. Everything's an identification under a node-centric system. So in essence, it's almost like saying this is their IP numbers. One of the things that we were working on is the smart mailbox landing pads, and with the node-centric system connected to that. Somebody like let's say that you have an insurance company. The insurance company turns around and says, listen, we're looking at the swath right now in that IMC weather that just got hit. There's a bunch of drones taking all the information down. We're keeping track of what happened. We're memorializing the events. But then all of a sudden later on, 100,000 claims come in, and it's outside the IMC swath. But because they couldn't give you an actual exact location of where that weather hit, whether it invoked, let's say, some kind of peril on your homeowner's insurance for hail and wind. And now all of a sudden they're saying, oh yeah, I was part of that. Can I have my free roof? Can I have my free siding? Well, the problem is that won't be something that right now it's a problem, but later on it won't be, because you could turn around and take the sensor off the mailbox and daisy chain them all down the street and say, look, nothing happened here. You got no claim. This is old information. This is old hits. This is old storm. And so this is where you now have value add for all those inspectors, right? So now everybody that's using drone inspection can turn around and say, I've got a value add here that nobody else has. You need me. And so this is where all this starts to stack up and the value adds start coming in, and why the end user, which is the UTM, start really benefiting.
If I may add on to a comment there, Mike, just some background. We made the largest license plate recognition database in the country in that sense. So we locate 200 to 300 million license plates on vehicles of cars monthly. This is a company called DRN Data with 10 years. And that's just pictures of license plates, the pictures of cars. And we've learned how to monetize that data into multiple markets: law enforcement, auto finance, auto insurance, and many places. So as we come, and one of my things I was doing 4 years ago before I left the company was getting to do that via drone. Not just in this country, but on others. But the point here is there's many things that drone organizations now, or say your future drone delivery organization, they'll be flying over things and doing their primary mission. They have no idea of the value of the other things they flew over. Thus, it could be help solve a crime. It could say, hey,
wait a sec. You're going to go into bird's eye view insurance problems. Let's take Arkansas.
Yeah, we've touched on that previously.
Yeah, but, so you're not going to be able to record.
Not necessarily. This is we've already been able to do some of this here in the US. So I'll just finish the point here. Is that data, we can say this shape of a car is at a house of a place we're looking at that shape of a car. That is a Ford Mustang at a place we're looking for it. You score that data, and there's multiple organizations that will pay for that, and they're doing that now. So the source of that data, whether it be from a cell phone, smart glasses, or a drone, will be the same and be able to monetize it in multiple places. Thus, the more demand for that data, which we know there already is, there will be more use, and thus your sensor price will come down. That's what was to my point earlier. But Prisha, again, if I hear it properly, please, I'd like to hear your point. I'd like to understand your point.
Okay, so when we engage with drone companies, we have to ask them to have bird's eye view insurance or ask them not to record because so I work at a telecom. Actually, I've worked at all three. So AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile at this time. And it is also within local jurisdictions in which they say you can't record. Now, you can video, which means video goes to the cloud. It can help with remote or assist piloting, but you cannot record. You cannot keep it in a repository because we are helping with a large box company in Arkansas. Their drones cannot record. What they can do is they can visualize, they can sense and deflect, they can sense and avoid, they can look once they get to the place in which they're going to deliver with, let's say, a 120 to 160 fisheye lens, drop down, take back up, turn off that camera and go back, but they can't record. So I am curious when you are doing that, because we ran into this with autonomous vehicles in another state. How are you going to indemnify the company that holds all of that imagery if you can do it within that local jurisdiction? And how are you going to be able to enable drones to do that when they're having to pay not only insurance just for don't land on my house or my head, but also bird's eye view insurance, which is killing them on top of all of the rest of the services that they have to do.
And this opens up a whole, when you say public safety, this opens up a whole Fourth Amendment issue. So, it might sound like a good idea, an easy sale, but look at Baltimore, what's going on with that aircraft that they had circling over. Great idea, but what's the expectation of privacy, whether it's for commerce or whether it's for, public safety? You really, how far down that rabbit hole do we want to go? But we're going there.
It's a big one.
That's a Don Zoldyke question.
It is. And
Let me throw
Ray, I would ask you to promote Arthur to take my chair because I got to run.
Yeah, that's right, Jeremy. I'm sorry about you. Got to. I know we're running
Great
long.
meeting,
Let me do
everybody.
that. All right,
Thank
Jeremy.
you,
Thanks
Jeremy.
for coming out. I really appreciate it.
that was great, Jeremy.
If you guys want to stick for a couple more minutes and just talk, it's cool. I got another couple minutes before I got to go. Honestly,
I wanted to throw one more observation out there. So I have a background in networking. I have sold to large enterprise clients through all of the telecom companies. And I have to say, you have to be careful what you wish for. Right now, you feel like you're in a data desert and you want a lot of sensors, but very quickly you will be overwhelmed with a volume of unstructured data. And there's this notion that we can be omniscient and take in huge volumes of data and make sense of it. But it turns out in practical terms, that is not actually possible. That's the lesson of large scale network management. So what you need to do instead is come up with algorithms that can get the data they need to make the decision they need to make rapidly and pertinently in real time. So there's an interesting balance of cloud-based repositories and real-time sensor data in your locality that needs to be navigated. And the reason I want to bring this up is Mike, you're obviously deep in this. I've been monitoring UTM and I'm seeing a definite bias towards the naive, we'll just throw everything up to the cloud and then we'll tell people what to do. But we know that doesn't work. So
Agree.
No, you're right.
There is that wonderful thing called distributed file sharing, but that also is a problem as well. Certain countries want their data stored in their country, and you can't do that in a distributed file way.
China, when you take a connected car and autonomous vehicle, they want to distribute it two-way, that you can distribute to the cloud and to dispatch, but they also want it within the jurisdiction that the vehicle is flying or driving.
Agree.
And
Same thing
now
with South Africa.
Now you have ITAR issues as well. So you know, but in terms of what you were saying, Peter, you're absolutely right. This is where, for example, the calibration portion, using the weather as an example, like with Don would make your use case for that specific operation or mission, right? So whatever the data in that node-centric system is, it's got to be use case specific. But to address your thing, it also has to be universal as well. Like there has to be a universal, what's the minimum that we, where situational awareness, even for AI ML, becomes overloading, and how do we make that minimum integrity requirement that they all are on the same page on, aside from the value adds? Hopefully that addressed what you were saying.
Yeah, this conversation has totally evolved, and it's a fascinating conversation. We've got a panel of experts here this is another happy hour to have right here. I mean, you guys are all welcome back anytime. I appreciate it. I'd love to hear your take on this coming from the 5G spectrum perspective and the mobile service provider perspective on how you're going to enable operations inside cities. I've looked at it from a surveillance perspective, outside of what Jeremy said about the GPS navigation stuff, but from a multilateration perspective, having a number of kind of like we use for ground surveillance on airports, we use multilateration. I didn't know if that was enabled by 5G within cities, and that could be used for navigation, or at least for bounding routes, so that drones could basically read those routes along the way. Is that something that you guys are working on? Or you can disclose that you're working on? You're muted.
Okay.
I simply have to say no comment at this time until after CES.
Here we
Roger
go.
that.
I guess we're missing one, right?
I was curious though, have you guys considered, because you're talking about sensors, have you worked with any sensor companies, let's say Qualcomm, who would allow you to send that information from the drones in a peer setting to each other instead of just on the ground, on the windmills, on the buildings and such?
Well, if you're talking peer-to-peer, usually, yeah, you can do that with blockchain, absolutely.
But would you do it vehicle to vehicle, and would you feel like you could trust it? And
You
have
could,
you worked?
you could, because it's really, you're validating data, right? So what is the criteria of that validation? Like what is the characteristics that you put into that node for it to validate in terms of other nodes that are on the same system communicating with each other? So when we say a node's a node, it's because it's really a CPU. We don't really care where it's coming from. We just want to validate that the data is good, and
but what you're validating, Mike, is you're validating cryptographic signature and ascribing an identity to it, and therefore a responsibility based on that.
Yes.
And there's the rub, right? I think that nodes are going to have to take a Bayesian approach, and based on your priors, you're going to start out not trusting, and you're going to have to revise your priors as you get more data and decide. But I don't think blockchain alone solves it, because the chain of custody for, say, web-based HTTPS certificates was easily subverted with money. And there's no reason to think that that wouldn't be done again in blockchain, so that you can get spoofed IDs and you can get corrupted ones, or that's the hard part. So you have to assume that some of the data you're getting is false by accident because the sensor failed, you're out of GPS coverage, and some is deliberately being manipulated against you.
Right. No, I agree with you 100%. That's where those vaults come in. You have to make sure that when it doesn't meet the criteria, it goes into a vault for forensic examination. That's where you can say, hey, was this just that the drone sensor itself went down because the sensor was bad, or was that really a spoof, or was there a data loss link? So that's where you can sit there and forensic it later.
Wow, this is a great conversation. I really like to end this about 6:15, so we got about 4 minutes left here, at least by my clock. Peter, you have the atomic clock, so am I close on my time? I mean, I'm just going off of Windows here.
Oh, your clock is as good as mine, because you're using NTP. It's not NNTP, it's NTP, and I'm enough of a geek, I have to correct myself. Did we miss anybody else's questions?
I don't think so. I think everybody got their stuff in. No open questions here, answer questions. That was just stuff. Yeah, I think we're okay. This was enlightening to me. I can honestly say I've done some work in surveillance and and GPS, but I'm an air traffic controller. I'm not an engineer, and I'm definitely not as schooled as you people are. So thank you very much for educating me and Ron and the rest of our audience. This is going to be recorded. It is recorded. It's going to be posted on our website. It'll be on our YouTube channel. We'll post it on LinkedIn. I would love to welcome any of you back to do another happy hour to speak specifically about this topic. Maybe after CES. I don't know. We'll have to see. But it sounds like my hunch about multilateration is going to be correct. Thank you again. Thank you to our sponsors, HHI, Hilo Holdings, the Heliport at Kearney, Low Altitude Operations Solutions, Leach Strategic Partners. Anybody else who chooses to sponsor us, we'll be happy to take your money. We will absolutely, if anybody wants to help us out keeping this thing going, I hope we're providing value to the industry. We are advocating on behalf of the industry as best as we can from the operational perspective. And if anybody else has any other final comments, I just have to say I'm out of whiskey. So.
Well, Raymond, for one, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very blessed amongst all these people with this expertise before me, and so I'm grateful to be aboard this conversation, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming, Mike. And Arthur, thanks for standing in for Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Sorry I didn't speak too much, but I work with Jeremy, so he did a great job.
Yeah, we ran long. We always run long because we talk a lot. We waste a lot of time talking about whiskey and other silly things. But Peter, thanks.
Behind happy hour.
Yeah, well, I know, right? Yeah. Brett, thanks for showing up. I really appreciate it. It's great talking with you the other day, Peter. As always, appreciate it. Pleasure meeting you virtually. I'd love to
Likewise.
talk more.
Nice
Look us
meeting
up
everybody, yeah.
and reach out if you think we can help you in any way, shape, or form. So,
Good deal.
all right, let's call it.
Thank you.
Thank you, people.
Thank you.
Take care.
Right.